I go to the gym every day. That is not negotiable. That's me. This is what I live and breathe, and it's as important to me as anything else in my life. But I'm not expecting my clients to have that same passion for it. I would love that, but it doesn't need to be as aggressive as I am putting my hands on weights 6 or 7 days a week. That is what I like for myself.
Welcome back to Born Superhuman. So one of my things that I love to do is scroll through social media and find messages that really stand out. But once we find that message, the first thing we do is we go and check who the person is, find out they're an expert, and then expect to see them with hundreds of thousands of followers. Well, my guest today was giving information that you would expect from an expert with millions of followers because it was so dynamic, so clear. And what I loved was she spoke at the level of those that need to learn, not trying to impress. But she didn't have a lot of followers. I reached out and said, I need to get your message out there. I would love for you to be part of Born Superhuman. And she was gracious enough to accept. Then I found out she doesn't have followers because she's not about social media, but she has so many clients because she's about real life. With that being said, I'm so proud to introduce today Lisa Levy. Welcome to Born Superhuman.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
It's a fascinating journey you've been on. I went and did some research on you. Your journey started 47 years ago when, as a young girl, you had scoliosis.
Correct.
And then you were able to work, understand the work that you had to put in. And then your husband came down after an injury with, I would say, life-changing situation that you went to battle for him to learn so much about what you know today.
Correct.
Before we get into that, tell us about you as that young girl growing up. What were your dreams? Did you really think you'd be going into health and wellness?
No, never. I want to be an actress. Frankly, I just want to be a star, pretty much. And I was doing some modeling as a teenager, my mom driving me and going on what they call go-sees and getting some work. But once I, once it was discovered I had scoliosis, I'm lucky that I had parents or I have parents who were interested in seeking alternative therapies. There were things at the time called Rolfing. I mean, they still exist. Rolfing, Feldenkrais, different types of modalities to keep you out of surgery. In retrospect, surgery may have been the better option, but my parents felt like they should avoid that at all costs. Who knows? Because I do have quite a bit disfiguring curvature on my back, which I carry myself well, and most people don't know until they see me in a bathing suit and then they're not quite sure. Once I went through all those different therapies, the goal was how do you keep your spine moving and live without discomfort? And that was sort of my introduction. I started weight training when I was 16 years old. So, being that I'm 62, we're talking about like early 80s. That was very, very early for especially a woman. And through weight training and through understanding that I had to somehow keep myself fit. And there was nothing, remember, of course, no computers, no social media, nothing. I went to school with a typewriter to college. But a lot of it was just instinct. I knew that I had to stay thin, stay strong, and stay fit in order to avoid pain. If I wanted to go to a movie or sit in a car for a long time, I had to do everything right. And do not get me wrong. I loved junk food when I was a teenager. We didn't know all the nutrition things that we do now. In the early 80s, we were told fat was bad. So we were, flooded the market with all these heavy sugar-laden sweets and all the stuff that was devoid of fat. And, like every other teenager, I was like, this is fantastic. And now we know, well, that's really was the end of our metabolic health, at least in the United States. And so that's really how it started. I didn't know that I would do something in health and wellness or fitness, but I was always involved in it for myself.
So there's something that I wanted to read out in here, which I thought was, as we get into this, and I'm going to read it off of your website because I want to be very specific because it really stood out. You state, health should feel simple and sustainable. No complicated routines, no fluff. My approach focuses on straightforward self care that's easy to integrate into your life and delivers real, lasting results. Now, that really stood out with me because I'm a big believer that health should be free if we take care of ourselves. And when it starts to cost us because we've let ourselves go or something comes in. How did you really transition? And tell us a little bit about the journey with your husband to get to the point where you realize health is not just invaluable, it's completely possible.
Well, first, let me address what you brought up because I forgot that was on my website. But interesting, I worked with somebody yesterday where I was reiterating that without thinking about my website. I think that a lot of things you do and that you're involved with are probably not going to be for the average person. And even with peptides, they're not going to be for everybody, but the basics to build the foundation, it is possible for everyone. And so I try not to overwhelm people with a task list of 50 things, but let's take what your life is and make the tweaks we need to make to help you become a healthier version of yourself. When you sit down with anyone and ask them what their goals are and what they want their future to look like, no one is going to say, yes, I want to be in a convalescent home and I want to be a burden to my family and sit there with tubes in my body and, my brain's gone to like nobody's going to say that, right? So I think as I aged and watched my parents, I think that my interest became was personal at the beginning. And then watching my husband struggle with a lot of aches and pains and body injuries that came from doing Ironman competitions and other physical things, where maybe his diet wasn't completely dialed in. He wasn't doing the breath work and the meditation and the yoga and the stretching. He was just, go, go, go hard, swim, bike, run. And as his body broke down, and I went back to school for myself, not for him specifically. Of course, I went back to have purpose and have some certification for what I was kind of already doing and some validation and to learn. But he was always in my head. How can we avoid this surgery? How can we avoid that surgery? How can we help you feel pain-free? Because all the things I'm doing and I continue to do, I live a pain-free life. And I've been very lucky.
So I'd say very committed.
Very, of course. I mean, I've been lucky. Okay, you're right. I'm lucky that I'm pain-free, but I'm doing everything that I feel I need to do to stay that way. And there are simple things. They're eating a whole foods diet and doing your strength training and doing your cardio. There are people who live in parts of the world where getting good access to healthy food is difficult. I want to acknowledge that. However, even people with less financial ability can make the choice. It might be rice and beans. You know what I'm saying? But going back to, I was in a lecture on stem cell therapy in school, and we had been traveling, and I started hearing about peptides, but I didn't really know how to access them here. They were being used by doctors, but they were like seriously underground. It was not talked about. I didn't really know how to get them. I didn't know who to contact. It seemed very expensive. In Europe, it was just very openly discussed and talked about. People were using peptides for years. They had great results. And the more I started researching and looking into this and started learning about stem cell therapy, we made the decision that he was going to do stem cell therapy out of the country. The peptides themselves, in the end, probably were the most helpful thing. With stem cell therapy specifically, it generally takes repetitive times of doing it, and it is extremely costly. And you have to make this decision. Do I really want to spend all these thousands of dollars? If I knew I was going to be healed, yes, I would. But it was really the peptides that did the trick. And that is how I came to going through all these other certifications and getting involved and finding that everything else I've done in my life had led to this, and this was what I want to focus on and be my most passionate about.
What a beautiful journey, because I truly believe we have to learn everything along the way that we do until we jump into where we're going to be an expert. And I just want to clarify, you are a certified integrative nutrition, health, and wellness coach, just for those that are listening.
Correct.
The post that I saw that we're going to get into, that's fascinating because right now it's either the worst of the worst or the godsend, is peptides. Now, for people that don't know what peptides are, they're basically small molecules that are foundation building blocks for proteins. And then that affects our system's function and development. And then when those um, amino acids get together and form chains, that's how we then create the proteins, the peptides. So it is natural for us.
Correct. So we have thousands and thousands of peptides in our body. And, people push back and they say, well, they're not actually from your body. No, they are synthetically created, of course, in a lab, but they are identical to what you have in your body in the same way the HRT is. It is unlike a pharmaceutical drug, which is foreign to your system. The peptide is not foreign to your system. That is why the safety profiles are off the charts. You're not introducing something that your body doesn't already make and doesn't already have in going on. They're signaling molecules. They're not going in the cell. I heard another doctor say the other day, which I thought this was a great explanation. He said they're the locks. Sorry, they're the keys to the lock. So you have to find the right key for the right lock, and the fit should be very seamless. Most of them, I mean, the GLPs aside, they really have no side effects, no adverse side effects. They have yet to find them.
Would I be correct then in saying it's just another form of a vitamin that's naturally produced in the body? For example, we take vitamin D, yet it should be developed naturally in the body. I have a hard time with vitamin D because I can't convert it from D2 to D3 and travel. So we get a support system to boost what's naturally there. Am I off on that?
Well, vitamin D specifically is unique because, yes, our body uses it, needs it. Some of us can't convert it, but vitamin D, what we take, is not exactly the same that's in our body. So, some of my almost all my clients, my non-negotiables are vitamin D. Most people, when they test, they're very surprised that their levels are low. And one of the ways, look, peptides are at the top of the pyramid. Your foundation has to be set. So vitamin D is essential to I mean, it's a hormone. It affects everything in your body. So this is a little non sequitur, but the conventional doctor reference range for vitamin D is 30 to 100. That's pretty massive reference range. So if you go to a doctor and your vitamin D tests at 31, you're going to be told you're fine. That's what happened to my dad. 2 years running, he was at 31. When I finally saw that, I said, Dad, that's absurd. I cannot believe that a doctor who is well respected does not understand that why would you want to be on the bottom of the reference range? Let's boost you up to 60 or 70, which may take a precision dose. You may need 7,000 IUs, you may need 5,000 IUs, you may need it with a little oil. It's a fat soluble. Most people don't know that. I pop it in the morning with their coffee. So vitamin D, omega-3, some of the magnesium, we are deficient, but these are not made in the same way a peptide is. They're not recognized in the same way. They're exogenous, and peptides are endogenous. They are literally what you already have in your body. So it's a little bit different.
A great explanation. That's why I'm going to ask questions, because we can define it very simply. And I love when we use similes to, because people will understand that more. What right now is the pushback then on peptides? Because I saw a very well-known doctor on Instagram the other day talking about it, saying that peptides are dangerous for you and you shouldn't be using them. And yet he's well respected. And I think this is where the confusion comes in with people. You got one side not just saying it's great, but they've got living examples of people that have saved their lives and living their best life ahead. And then you got the others saying it can kill you.
I've never heard anyone say that because it's actually that I mean there's no evidence to support that. So I don't know who that was. So I'll tell you what the post you saw was when I was talking about the FDA, and then right after that there were some changes. So let me explain it. I'm not a scientist, I'm not a doctor, so I'm going to explain it in the terms like I use for my own clients. Peptides were up around, they were used starting around 2013. So they were used, doctors were using them, they were allowed to use them. There was a company that identified the BRCA gene for breast cancer, and they tried to patent it. They did patent it. They got a patent, and they were going to be the only people allowed to test for it. I don't totally understand this, but in my simple way, I think it's still kind of interesting and relevant. The They were taken to court, and the Supreme Court said they cannot patent something that's already in the body. They can't patent a gene. Like I can't patent your muscle, right? So when that happened, peptides became sort of a free-for-all because they are identical to what's in the body. So doctors were using them. Again, I didn't know any doctors using them, but they were legally allowed to use them, and compounding pharmacies were legally allowed to make them. So for a long time, doctors were prescribing and using. There was a well-known doctor I've heard speak many times in Florida. He had a clinic, he was using it. He said he basically eradicated orthopedic surgery. I mean, that sounds extreme, but there were a lot of doctors using a lot of them for all kinds of great effects. For some reason in 2023, I mean, it was the Biden administration, but who knows why? I don't know the reason why. Many peptides were placed into category 2, which means they were considered dangerous. And in one day, boom, these doctors were not allowed to prescribe them anymore. So compounding pharmacies weren't allowed to make them or create them or dispense them, and they just went away. So if you were a doctor that was following the law, that's it. You were given 1 day notice, boom, you're done. That is when the research chemical companies started really seeing an opportunity because people were still using them and having great success. And that's when the boom really started. So it hasn't been really that long, even though they were used for a long time. And the thing is about the safety, I'm going to talk about BPC 157 because that's sort of the gateway peptide that most people have heard about or are hearing about it. There was a study that with rats where they transected the Achilles of a rat, so like slice them in half. And BPC 157 healed it completely, completely. And what they study is it's called, I think, the LD50. What dose does it take for 50% of the population or under 50% of the population to have an adverse effect, which could be death? That could be death. Any adverse effect. With BPC 157, they have never even gotten to LD1. There has never been a dose given to a human or an animal that caused an adverse reaction. Never. And that's fascinating to me. People always say to me, well, is this dose going to be too high? Basically, the way I dose BPC 157 is what can your pocketbook handle? Because the more you take, probably the more it's going to work. But with the other peptides, there were so many positive things. There's a peptide I don't work with called MK77, which stimulates ghrelin. So it stimulates your want for food and your appetite, which most of us don't want. But for people with certain cancer or other types of illnesses, that was extremely effective. Tesamorelin, which is FDA approved, it was approved for people with HIV who were experiencing muscle wasting. So there are a lot of peptides that were used that everyone knows were extremely safe and effective. Um, I think you'd be hard pressed to find those dangerous results. That is, to me, somebody kind of driven by big pharma because they can't patent them. So there's no money in it for them. And by the way, that is all tied up in what's happening now because a few days ago, the FDA announced that 7 to 14 of these peptides are moving off category two. So that basically Biden administration said these are dangerous. And now this is not a political statement. I have absolutely no opinion about it. And Robert Kennedy said, nope, I'm going to push for these. These are not dangerous. Let's go back and reevaluate them. And what that means is if the compounding pharmacies are able to do this in July, they're going to have a hearing, then they will reevaluate the ability for doctors to prescribe them. But basically, it's a stamp of approval like, hey, we don't have anything to support that these are dangerous, so we're going to take them off category two.
Yeah, and I know I'll say I'm never into conspiracy theory. I'm into research and finding out what goes on. And with the story you told, and what we also know, it makes total sense. The big pharma say, hang on a minute, we're making all this money on drugs. I mean, we can look at certain drug companies out there that have been around 125 years, got billions in funding and never yet found a cure, but they've got a ton of drugs. And if we could heal someone and it's not going to cost anything, we lose our customers. And so it makes complete sense. And whether somebody's for or against RFK, it's not about who you're for or against. It's about what are they standing for, which is finding natural health remedies. And I'm excited for the change. Why would they keep jumping back and forth if it wasn't because they were trying to control it?
Most people believe that the pharmaceutical companies, because of the GLP-1s, they want to control that. They're saying that the new GLP-1 that's going to come out is going to be the first $1 trillion drug or peptide. I mean, it is a peptide. And I think basically they want to make sure that no one's compounding it, no research chemical companies are offering it, that someone like me wouldn't have access to it. And they're basically saying, okay, but we'll give you back these other ones because they can never patent it. And BBC 157 is not going to be in competition with, tirzepatide. They're just not the same molecule, right? So so I did an update to that post saying, hey, this is something new that came out. This is good news. It's just reminding us because people ask me all the time, how do you know if they're safe? And what I tell everybody is bring me anything you find that's negative, anything. My sister listens to NPR and she'll say, hey, I heard this. My mom reads New York Times. She'll say, I heard that. Clients, never has anyone brought me anything that cannot be taken apart. It's this clickbait, right? To address a study where 1% of the population of people over 65 who already had diabetes had a symptom. I mean, you know, so I love hearing the negative, but there's nothing that has given me pause yet.
The negative is coming from opinion, not fact. It's not come from somebody showing that's happened. And I do take peptides myself, and I've only seen good results. I think the one you were talking about is from Eli Lilly. It's retatrutide, I believe, is the one that's coming out. It's the new GLP-1 where they can hold it, and it's meant to be the biggest fat loss um, opportunity. Let's put it that way. How can they go ahead now and have that one patented where they own it that's different from a peptide that can't be controlled?
So with all the GLP, so originally Ozempic, semaglutide, and there was other ones before that, liraglutide, they were being used for diabetes. Insulin is a peptide.
Hmm.
So before we had insulin, diabetes was controlled with diet. I said this before, probably on Instagram. In 1922, they discovered insulin and that it would help control diabetes. Before that, you ate a high fat, high protein diet, extremely low carbohydrates, and it kept your diabetes in check. Once insulin was let out of the bag and pharmaceutical companies could make tons and tons and tons of money, the American Diabetes Association stopped giving nutritional guidelines. So basically, their, I guess their philosophy, which sounds crazy, is eat whatever you want because you've got insulin to take care of you. Now, smart people who could do their own research knew that's pretty nuts. I still think I need to eat a high protein, low carbohydrate diet to keep, if you want to be healthy. But plenty of people with diabetes were not given the education that it's like being on a statin. Sure, take the statin and then it's a free for all. Go do whatever you want. So it wasn't until actually very, very recently, I would say, I think it's in the last year or two, that the American Diabetes Association actually came out and said, you know what? You really should watch your carbohydrate and your sugar intake. Like you actually do have to be careful. They started coming from a more health perspective. So that was our first introduction to peptide. We all know what insulin is. When the Eli Lilly and Novo Nordisk started developing these other, I'm calling them a drug because that's what they call them, but they are peptides, these GLP-1s. They discovered by accident that they could help with weight loss. It is not the peptide that they have patented, but the mechanism of action. And originally, because GLP-1 only lasts for 1 or 2 minutes in our system, so when we eat, we create it from our gut. What they were doing was trying to figure out how to extend that half-life. They did it to 1 day, but then studies show people don't want to inject themselves every day. This was, a while ago. Now some of us do. But most people, actually, many of my clients are like, I can't do a daily injection. So they worked on extending the half-life to get it to 5 to 7 days. They also added a system, hydrochloric acid in a system whereby these pre-injected pens could be shelf stable, they could be shipped, they could be stored. That is what they patent, the mechanism of action. However, they are going after all the research chemical companies that are selling semaglutide, tirzepatide, and now retatrutide. They are the pure form of it. So when I give someone tirzepatide or retatrutide, they're getting the pure form without the addition of these shelf-stable components, and they're not in these pre-injected pens. That is how they're able to circumvent the issue of how do I patent a peptide or peptide, something that's naturally occurring in my system. Listen, I mean, retatrutide is an unbelievable compound. There's no bodybuilder probably alive today that is not using some form of GLP because they were using bodybuilders or people in the wellness space were using other things that probably weren't as healthy for you, like human growth hormone, other things. Now they have peptides to achieve the same goals in a much more safe environment. So the retatrutide is going to, I mean, they're going to make billions and billions and billions of dollars. And I think most of us feel like, let us have the peptides, you know, back off. Did I get, I might have gotten off your original question.
No, not at all, because all this is fascinating information. And I think if we get off the conversation, I also think sometimes that's where people want it to go because we can be so structured, we don't get into the free flow. So feel free to keep doing that. When we go to GLP-1s, and we know Ozempic was the most famous one because it got pushed the most. And I think with retatrutide, from what I understand, it really focuses on belly fat more than anything, from what I understand.
Okay, so let's talk about belly fat for a minute. So people confuse visceral fat, VAT, we call it, belly fat, sub-Q. So one thing I do with 100% of my clients, except for the people I work with in Mexico, because it's a little trickier to get what I call a DEXA. Well, I don't call it. It's a body composition DEXA. It's a little more complicated there and more expensive. But here in the States, In Los Angeles, you can get it for $50, and other parts of the country, about 100. And what you do in a DEXA scan, it takes 5 minutes, and you get a tremendous amount of information. But most importantly, it's your body composition. So, how much fat mass, how much lean mass, and then your visceral fat, which you cannot see. So, the visceral fat is what's around your organs. Our body can only handle a maximum of 6 pounds. Well, should only handle a maximum of 6 pounds, but the goal is to be under 1 pound, which means under 1 pound of your entire body weight should is what you should have around your organs if you have any. Zero is the goal. You're not going to get there. I'm not saying this to brag. I'm saying as explanation, mine is zero point 0.1.
Wow.
Which I'm not going to get better than that. That doesn't mean I have no body fat. That means I have no visceral fat around my organs, which comes from alcohol, sugar, carbohydrates, and the visceral fat will come down as you lose overall body fat, but that is not the fat you see. And I'm just addressing that because when people talk about belly fat, they talk about like, well, I don't have one, but literally having a big belly. Some people with a lot of visceral fat, it's pushing out past their organs. So sometimes what you see is the fat, but overall, that's just sub-Q body fat. Retatrutide, because it is targeting, it agonizes a receptor called glucagon, and that has been found to help with fat breakdown and also increases thermogenesis. So it heats up the body. I've had one, two, maybe three clients who've taken Retta who've said they've had a little more, they felt heart racing. That is a side effect you read about, not something to be concerned about. But sometimes people report that it's too much. They feel it's too intense for them, and I'll take them back to tirzepatide. So we cannot lose fat from one area as a targeted way to exercise or eat. We will lose overall body fat. So I haven't heard that retatrutide specifically targets belly fat, because we're going to lose it from our arms, our butt, our hips, our thighs, whatever, that your body decides that. And visceral fat specifically is more targeted by other peptides, but overall, the energy use, the thermogenesis, and this agonizing of glucagon does help more with fat loss than the other two GLPs. So yes and no is the answer.
Fascinating, because I know the subcutaneous fat, which is the one that we can see on the outside,
Correct.
is very different. And like you said, visceral fat is actually more dangerous because as we surround the organs and they can no longer function or move freely, then
Yep.
that's more of a life threat than the one that we actually see. But I have a question coming off of that. If we're removing the fat from the organs and we know that fat is important for our brain, how does it affect? Does it cross the blood-brain barrier? And obviously, you're super smart. You've got a point one, the visceral fat. How do we make sure that we're retaining? Is it fish? Is it our diet that allows it to come in to be used? What would we do?
Well, first of all, our brain needs cholesterol. Look, if you got some bodybuilders going to 5, 6% body fat, I mean, they may not, their bodies may not work as efficiently. I'm sure you've heard about women who lose their period, amenorrhea, they get too low. Most people, most people cannot get into those ranges of body fat that we're talking about where it would be dangerous. I don't work with anybody that's really lower than my husband's 9%. But he's doing all the things. It's eating the right protein, exercising the right way, taking the omega-3s, taking the vitamin D, all the things that are going to help your brain, including peptides. I think for most people, when they want to be optimized, I'm talking to them about getting to 15 to 18, maybe 20% body fat, again, depending on age. So if you're a young woman who's in your childbearing years, I'm going to say let's not take you down below eight. Let's not make lower than 18%, 20% the goal, because I don't want your body to stop working. But in terms of your brain, I think it's just making sure that everything is working together synergistically, the hormones, the cholesterol, the omega-3, making sure that you're not getting a lot of omega-6, that you're doing everything. So I don't really worry about getting into those lower fat ranges. That doesn't really concern me because most people are not going to get there, right? And most people say, I don't need to be 9% body fat. That wasn't his goal, by the way. It's just where he happened to get to. They just want to look good, feel good in their jeans. Listen, I have influencers who I love and adore, and they say they want to be snatched. Like that's the look they want, the tight, the super fit. That's fine. I have no problem with that. People looking good, it helps them feel good as long as we're doing everything in a healthy way.
Yeah, I was sitting after my accident, I was sitting at about 21.2% body fat and feeling strong, but I knew I wasn't looking how I felt and I wanted to lose. So in 3 months, I changed my diet and I went down to an 8.2% body fat. But I
Wow.
found that I didn't have the energy to race the bikes. And so I went back up to about an 11. Right now, I'm sitting at 11% because I found that I still have the energy for a 2.5 hour bike race. But at the same time, I'm not draining myself, which I found at the 8.2. But people were sending me um, comments on posts saying 8.2, that's impossible. You wouldn't be able to function like that. That's way too low. It's unhealthy. And I'm a big believer if we're feeling great, there's a reason for it. If we weren't doing healthy, we wouldn't feel it. But what would you say is the typical first time person reaching out to you? Because I know you have great courses and coaching that you do through your website and the Lisa Levy Living program. What is the typical client that comes into you that you say, this is the person for me, I can really help them?
I'm going to first tell you what the person I don't want to work with. And then I'll tell you where most of my clients sit. I started out my practice working with primarily pre and postmenopausal women because I'm 62, and I thought these are the women I can help. And I do have a lot of them, and I have worked with a lot of them, but I do find there is some resistance. People have to want to change, not just because they see it on Instagram. They have to want it internally for themselves. And listen, when people come to me and we measure their body fat and they're 40% or more, it's very shocking to them and to me because I, it's just a very difficult situation to sit in. I've had some vegans come to me and I can't, I'm not gonna, they're vegans for more reasons. I can't argue with that. It is what it is. But if somebody comes to me with 45% body fat and they're vegan, it's just really hard to deal with. They have to really, really, really want to change and work at it. And generally, they don't. They come to me and say, I just want the pill. I want the shot. I don't have time to work out. I work 8 to 8. I met with somebody and he said, I just want the shot. I work 8 in the morning till 8 at night. My wife's not on track. She doesn't really want to change the diet. I turned him down. So unless people, if they have very high body fat, unless they are super committed, that is not someone I'm comfortable working with. Now let's go to the bulk of my clients. Most people, even if they appear thin, are testing over 30% body fat, which is considered obese. And I'm very straightforward. I'm not mean, but I'm very straightforward. So people will get their DEXA, they sit down in my office, and they say, I'm very surprised at the body fat. And I said, okay, well, this puts you in an obese category. And what it's just numbers. So what are we going to do about it? And they'll say, well, do I look obese? And I say every time, that's not from, I'm not going to tell you anything. Ultimately, I don't care what you look like. I care what the data shows. You're a science guy, right? You're a research guy. If you have over 30% body fat, but you appear thin, that's a real thing. Thin on the outside, fat on the inside. And that is how many of my clients present to me. And if they're willing to do the work, we can make those changes. I got a DEXA scan actually emailed to me today. I started with someone who's in the wellness business. So she was very determined to do all the things that I suggested. We started her on a few supplements. We started her on a low dose GLP, and we started on a growth hormone peptide called ipamorelin. She did 2 cycles, and we did a couple other things. She just got her third DEXA. She's gone, I literally looked at it briefly. I think she's gone from 33% body fat to 22% body fat, but slowly, healthfully, she lost about 13, 14 pounds. She feels amazing. That's a perfect client, right? We don't all have to be, extremely low body fat. It's like you said, how do you feel and what is healthy? And being 35% body fat is not healthy. But there are people, there's someone who got measured. I think his VAT was over 6. I emailed him right away. I said, You have a very serious problem. He wasn't even a client yet. He had just gotten the DEXA. I never heard from him again. I think that it was so shocking to him, and I hope he went and got help. But so a bulk of my clients, so getting back to your original question, are in the 30% range. And but some people come to me who are 22 and they want to get to 15, and they want their skin to look good and their hair to look good. People don't only come to me for weight loss and fat loss. There's other pathways that we target. So I always want to know what are we looking for here? What are we trying to accomplish? Sit down, we talk. There's so many pathways that can be targeted, and I don't want to do them all at once. But if you are overweight or if you're over fat, that's number one. It has to be, because that will clear up so many things.
Yeah, it's very interesting because I have another company, Total Balance Company, which is all about balance training. I have about 70,000 clients in there. And going back to you as a child, one of the side effects we had was incredible for scoliosis. And because the brain would naturally begin to straighten the spine out by focusing on something else, which was the balance and the equal or change within right and left.
Um,
But even with all the people that are out there, people again say, well, I don't really want to do the work. Well, if you don't want to do the work, don't expect the change. And they say, well, okay, I'll use the board. And after 2 weeks, 3 weeks, they're now no longer a full risk. They're back walking properly. And then they stop using it. And sometimes we'd get returns. I say, why are you returning? I said, well, I've used it, for 3 weeks. I don't need it anymore. I'm back walking. And this goes to your point. When people come to you and say, I want to fix the problem, but they don't want to change their lifestyle because they've become comfortable being, if I can use this word, toxic in their lifestyle, then we know it's going to go back. And to your point with the story with the gentleman that came in, you said you got a serious problem. There's also this mix that's going on now, which I think is the negativity of advertising, which is dramatizing everything out of fear to get people to sign up. And so we become numb to the reality of where we are because we think it's a sales tactic. How do you then take that and find that those people that are actually willing to change their lifestyle, because then it's long term and they find down the road they're much happier being that way anyway? How do you find you can motivate them to want to change? Is it a vision? Is it fear? Is it excitement? Go ahead.
Sorry, it's never fear. And funny story, I have a girlfriend that reached out to me a few days ago saying, I want to hire you. I want you to work with my mom, but she doesn't want to hear about peptides, and you can't be so straightforward. I mean, she's used to how I've dealt with her. And you have to be nice. And so I got on a Zoom with her, she and her mom yesterday, and I was as nice as could be, and I didn't bring up peptides, and we talked about she had a health scare. She's in her 80s. And we talked about what are the realistic changes that one can make when they're already in their 80s. They're not going to overhaul their life. That's not happening. So with each person, I have to address the reality. Where can they meet me? If they come to me and say, I'm not going to exercise, end of a story, I'm going to 100% of the time say, don't waste your money on a peptide, including a GLP, because in the end, you are going to lose the battle. Most people come to me willing to do the work because I charge money, peptides are expensive, and the way I deal with clients, which is I check in all the time, I'm on top of everybody, I take it very seriously, and I take the responsibility of taking care of these people seriously. So if people are going to spend the time and money to do this, my hope is that they will follow the rules, so to speak. So if somebody says, okay, all right, I'm willing to start exercising, I ask them, how many minutes a week? Can you give me 15 minutes 3 times a week? Let's start there. Because most people, once they start doing things, realize, wow, I actually feel better and I look better. And for some people, a lot of my clients in Mexico, some things I do regarding like diet, they have not had the education. Now, look, listen, I have some clients there who have nutritionists and trainers, and um, peptides are like next level. But some people just didn't know that having a smoothie in the morning with, all kinds of fruit and oatmeal and peanut butter was what the problem was with them putting on 20 pounds over the last, couple years. So sometimes it's very easy and they think, wait, you mean I could just eat eggs and this will change? Yeah, that's an easy one. But listen, people fight me. They fight me and I don't enjoy that because I would rather work with the people that want to be compliant because I'm not throwing a million things at them. Even regarding supplementation, people come to me and they're on like 100 things, and I'm not exaggerating. I myself gag at the idea of taking 100 supplements a day, but they're on so many things, and so people have added them and this one added that and Instagram added that. So I will do like a quick check of everything and find, oh, they've got like 6 different magnesiums and, 4 different ones of these. And can we just take this all down and stick to what actually matters? And, most of it's not going to hurt them, but like that's just a lot. So I go slow and I start small, and we work on metabolic health first and foremost. And once we have that under control, then we can work on your shoulder pain, your knee pain, your body fat, your skin, all the other things, your energy.
We talk about one of the things I teach at Born Superhuman is we don't have a lack of time, we have a lack of discipline of time. And everybody can find 15 minutes a day. And people say, well, Dan, you're not a mother, you don't have 5 kids, you're not working a full job, you're not doing the shop, you're not doing the cleaning. And I say, well, to find that 15, maybe you got to include those you're looking after and it becomes part of their lifestyle because now you're doing, instead of sitting serving in front of the TV, you're now out walking, talking together. So there's always a way. But how do you look at it and say to somebody, you're taking 100 tablets a day, which is taking you X amount of minutes. And then looking at someone like Brian Johnson that's taking 160 tablets a day. And, but that's his living. He does that for
Right.
his work. It's not everyday life. And then how do you get them to say, okay, I'll find that time. It's worth it. Because we know when you start exercising and having, you feel better within 2 or 3 days. You're already going, actually, I got a little bit more energy. And how can you change someone's lifestyle to then go, instead of taking this, I'll actionable this?
Well, I will tell you, GLPs are a great motivator, and I will tell people they're going to have to go to somebody else. If a couple months in, I see the DEXA, I will know right away if they're eating enough protein and they're doing a resistance training. I mean, it takes me 1 second. I do not go by self-reporting. And I I have conversations with people all the time who like, oh, well, I travel a lot and this, so do I. I mean, and by the way, I have 2 kids and I had a husband who was never around because he was, racing Ironman. Like, I get it. Believe me, I get it. And cooking is a huge part of my life, going to the farmers markets and grocery shopping like I lived in Europe, so I'm doing it every day and shopping. I get it. But I'll tell them, go on Amazon, buy some resistance bands, get a couple dumbbells, and watch TV. Or buy a treadmill. You could buy a cheap treadmill. You could buy one on Craigslist or Facebook Marketplace. Pa Park it in front of the TV. Put your kid in a playpen. I mean, we're talking about short amount of time. I'm not advocating neglecting your child, obviously, but we can all find a way to do something. The resistance bands, I literally showed on FaceTime the other day, I bought this roll of this thin resistant band on Amazon. I showed her like 5 exercises she can do for arms, upper body, biceps. And then I said, get the ones for your knees and just do squats. Do it for 15 minutes. I think people feel overwhelmed. Look, I go to the gym every day. That is not negotiable. That's me. This is what I live and breathe, and it's as important to me as anything else in my life. But I'm not expecting my clients to have that same passion for it. I would love that, but it doesn't need to be as aggressive as I am putting my hands on weights 6 or 7 days a week. That is what I like for myself. But I will tell you, if they go onto a GLP and they're not eating the protein and they're not doing the resistance training, and I see their weight loss and their lean mass has gone down to a degree where I am concerned, that's it. I'm not going to participate in the continuation of that happening. So they quickly get a wake-up call.
Yeah, I went and looked at a study where they were showing people that were taking Ozempic and they were dropping an incredible amount of weight very quickly. But they found that 80% of their initial weight loss was actually coming from muscle, not from fat.
Right.
So what happened was their BMI, their body mass index, showed that they were actually fatter in their
Correct.
makeup than they were before they took it. Then they've become weaker because their muscles can't support their movement. So now they're having more heart issues coming up because they can't walk as much. And in the long run, you've actually hurt yourself, but you kept taking you excited because you looked at weight loss. I'm just saying this for people that are listening, that weight loss, exactly as you're saying, is not about body weight loss. It's about the change between your muscle mass and your fat mass to go into that ability. But you talked a lot about the metabolic. You're going to attack first your metabolic rate. Explain to people what that is and why it's so important.
So, as a society, there's a very serious issue with metabolic health, meaning our bodies have become so dysregulated that we don't know how to handle glucose. And I teach this to every client, and probably 95% of them, they're hearing this for the first time. So, I'm going to say it in the simplest terms. Everything we put in our mouth that is not a protein or a fat is glucose. It's sugar to the system. It's carbohydrate, but it's sugar to the system. It does not matter if it's a banana or a Snickers bar. It really doesn't. Your body sees it the same way. And if we don't have lean mass, it just becomes fat. The muscle is the bank for the glucose. So your muscle says, oh, I know what to do with this energy. I'm going to partition it, nutrient partitioning where it needs to go, and I'm going to use it as energy. But since I think it's something like 90% of the people in this country are metabolically inefficient, meaning they eat too much carbohydrates, too much sugar, and their body converts it to fat and doesn't know what to do with all of it. And so their bodies have become insensitive to their own natural GLP-1 signals and their own insulin signals. And we've become dysregulated. And listen, we had the fires here. So we have air issues. We all know we have water issues. We have soil issues. So even when we get something that we feel is organic, we don't know what the farm next door was using, the glyphosate. So our bodies become dysregulated through all these things. Some of that are not because of something we've done. It's just our environment. And that's, a whole other subject. So we become dysregulated. And what the GLPs do is help regulate how your body's using the glucose and the insulin and helps you become more metabolically efficient. However, going back to what you just said, if you lose too much of your lean mass, you're not doing anything. You can drink Coke and eat gummy bears and lose weight. Weight loss comes from being in a calorie deficit. But if we lose too much of our lean mass, the amount of calories you need to survive goes down and down and down. So you actually have to eat less and less and less. If you build your muscle, you can eat more. You actually can eat more. So I will tell you one story about a very good friend of mine. It was during COVID, and we were doing yoga in my backyard. I had a yoga teacher come, and I have a nice area, and we had, five or six women would come once a week just so we'd have some community and some exercise together. And one of the women, very, very good friend, who did not, this is before it was a little more underground, taking Ozempic, and you didn't really want people to know, but I mean, her weight was like everybody was talking about it. She was never very, very heavy, but she got very thin, like seriously thin, very fast. And then her weight blew up. She got much fatter than she was before, much bigger. And it took a long time for her to be willing to have an open conversation with me. And I said, first of all, what stopped you from taking Ozempic? She said she missed eating because she hadn't done the lifestyle changes. She missed eating. And when she went off of it, she had no lean mass. She hadn't done any resistance training, hadn't prioritized protein. And so, exactly what you just said, she got fatter than she was before. And it took her a long time to be ready to do all the things you need to do it responsibly. And she finally did. She said, I'm going to wait. I said, why are you waiting? Now I can help you, and we can do it by little by little, a pound or two a week, as long as you're doing resistance training and prioritizing the nutrition in the way you need to. People can be incredibly successful, and this does not have to be a lifelong peptide that they're taking. They can cycle off of it with great results as long as everything else has changed.
That brings up two real important questions that I'd written down that I wanted to hit today. First off, the cleanliness of peptides. We know that there's multiple different countries, companies overseas that are not regulated. And right now in the US, there's not a set standard regulation. How would you advise somebody to check and find out the cleanliness of the peptide? Because if it's not clean, it's not going to work properly either. Plus, there'll be secondary side effects. What do you suggest, and how do you go about knowing the cleanliness of what you're providing for your clients?
Well, I was very lucky because, and I mentioned this in other podcasts, around the time when I started researching and learning and going through the certifications, a friend started a peptide company. So, and he was someone that I had already trusted previously. And so I was able to grow my practice while he was growing his business and he was doing the testing. Listen, no matter what anybody says, I don't care. They're lying if they tell you otherwise. All the raw material came from China in the beginning, all of it. Okay. There was no US manufacturing that didn't exist, maybe India, but most of it was coming from China. And what happened was some of the research chemical companies, I don't have access to compounding pharmacies. And again, what happened, right? Compounding pharmacies aren't allowed to make them anymore as of 2023, although there was a little, um, they were allowed to do the GLPs for a short amount of time because there was not enough, the pharmaceutical companies were not enough to keep up with demand. So for there was a short amount of time, the compounding pharmacies could work with them. Anyway, his testing and the way he was going about testing gave me confidence. And he was in the legal world. I mean, we were checking everything together. He then opened a lab. They started doing their own testing. They started being able to synthesize these things in the US. There are a few companies that are now. Um, but I will say that everyone I know who was getting them from all over the world and testing them, they weren't really finding they weren't really finding issues with sterility. The issues are more with milligram content. So, I'm not saying is not a problem. So let's say you have a 10 milligram vial of tirzepatide. You want there to be 10 milligrams. It could be, 9.6 to 10.3, but basically you want to know there's 10 milligrams because you don't want to overdose or underdose yourself. That is a bigger issue. There's also something talked about called endotoxins that people want to check for endotoxins. But the truth is, you'd have to inject a lot and daily more than you could probably get from the peptides to really cause an issue. Um, what I tell people is check the COAs, the certificate of authenticity, check out the company. They should be posted on the websites. And there are some well-known companies. One of them was called Peptide Sciences. They closed up shop because I think the FDA, they were very high profile and the FDA came, I'm guessing. They didn't say why, but kind of the buzz is the FDA came, sorry, you're doing what you shouldn't do. Um, there are thousands of research chemical companies online. And again, where's the negative? Where are people being harmed? You just can't, you won't find it. Now, are there ever side effects? Yes. I have people, tesamorelin specifically, which is FDA approved. People will get a little injection site reaction, and some people get to the point where they go, you know what? I can't do it anymore. It's not comfortable. And then that's it. We stop and we switch to a different one. My husband specifically, he did a few cycles of it. He did great. Last cycle, he was like, nope. After a couple weeks, I can't do it anymore. I had that with CJC 1295, which people love. And I myself, I had the worst reaction I've ever seen any of my clients. And as my husband said, better you than anybody else. I had like a breakout of hives on my stomach. But I took an allergy, pill. I took a Claritin. I rubbed some Benadryl cream on it, and I was fine. That is the worst of anyone I've ever seen with hundreds of clients.
What do you take?
So I cycle. I my HA1C, which is a measure of how much glucose is in your system, it's very hard to keep that low after menopause. So I have personally struggled to get it below 5.4. They say if you can get it to 5.2, it's going to help with longevity. So I'm back on a very low dose of retatrutide. My own gynecologist recommended it. She said, have you ever taken a GLP? I said, do you not know what I do? So I'm taking retatrutide with regularity. I was not taking it with regularity. I will tell you, the first time I ever took a GLP was not for weight loss. It's because I had what they call tennis elbow.
Mm.
And I think it was from like pulling the straps, in Pilates. I used to
Yeah.
do Pilates. I focus more on weights, but it was first recommended by a doctor that I try the GLP, and that knocked out the inflammation. Tirzepatide works a little bit better for inflammation than retatrutide. So that knocked it out. And basically, whenever I do feel that little bit of pull, I just, take a little bit of tirzepatide. So I always have some GLPs around. I use BPC 157 prophylactically for my workouts. It helps reduce inflammation, it helps with any muscle tear, anything. I take it about 3 to 4 times a week. If I start having a pain, I will start injecting it twice a day. Um, I did a post during COVID. I got plantar fasciitis, which is extremely hard to get rid of and painful. I think it was about a year and a half ago, I started getting it again. And I remember I came home and I said, oh, hell no, I'm not going through this again. And I started injecting BBC right down by the Achilles. Within 4 days, it was gone. BBC is really amazing, like I said, with the rats and the Achilles. So I always have that on hand. I would not travel without it because if you fall and you hurt yourself, whatever, I am loving right now thymosin alpha 1, which is an immune modulating peptide. Again, inflammation. It's a great detox. So if you've been on antibiotics or you've been sick, that's a very, very powerful immune modulator. I'm so hesitant to say this, but I used to get a flu once a year and probably a cold. And I have not had those issues since I started cycling the thymosin alpha 1. So that's something I really see real world results. And then everyone's favorite right now is MOTS-C. And MOTS-C is a mitochondrial reboot. It helps create ATP, energy, how your body, it's called an exercise mimetic, how your body handles fat. And I'm not saying you don't have to exercise, but when you exercise and when you fast, your body creates MOTS-C. So adding that into your system, people feel extremely energized. So I'm in an off cycle right now. I always miss it when I am. That's something I'll do 8 weeks on, 8 weeks off about. And I'm also currently on GHKCU, which is a copper peptide for skin. So that's our only beauty peptide. GHKCU is in everything. They're using it for hair foams and serums, face creams. I do use a topical as well. That will be FDA approved soon, I think, for topical use. And if you have the right formulation, studies show it does do something. But ultimately, sub-Q is always better. And it is considered a longevity peptide, tissue repair, skin and wound healing. It helps with fine lines and wrinkles, collagen synthesis. The thing is about peptides is that they're pleiotropic. They do one peptide can do many, many things. So BBC 157 may help you repair from surgery or injury or aches and pains or help you recover from the gym faster. So your workouts, but it's also a gut healer peptide. So if you come to me and you have colitis or IBS or what a lot of people think they have leaky gut, BBC 157 is going to be what we're going to use. And by the way, that's the only peptide that I would suggest to be used orally. The other ones, I just don't think they're there yet. They're not efficacious.
Yeah, I read that there are over 7,000 peptides within the body naturally. And with the advent of technology and the ability now to replicate what's in the body, as you said, it's still manufactured, but it's replicating. It'd be fascinating to see what comes up in the future because there's no, there's nothing that can't be done now. So even though you've got
Right.
7,000 peptides, like you said, they have multiple functions, multiple focus. You talk a lot about cycling, and I know you've given me a lot of your time today, but we're talking about cycling, and you said you're 8 weeks on, 8 weeks off. Everybody's a little different, but how important is it to cycle off, and what's the reason that people should do that and not become dependent? And is there a negative side within the body if you don't cycle?
I don't think it's a negative that you're going to feel, um, except for the GLPs. People who have a tremendous amount of weight to lose, I've had people on them for a year and a half and there's no issue. But we're talking about higher doses who have a lot of weight to lose. For people who are on very, very, very low doses, I'm talking about a half a milligram, once a week or even 250 micrograms a couple times a week. I also don't think those people really have to be concerned about cycling. They're on it for more longevity purposes. But somewhere in the middle, the receptors are going to get burnt out. And so, BBC, to be honest, for myself, I don't really cycle it. Um, but if you're taking, let's say, BBC and TB 500 to recover from surgery, let's do 8 weeks and then stop. 12 if we still have some issues to resolve. But there can be receptor burnout, and we want to make sure they work properly. So cycling them, especially the growth hormone peptides. So for me, I like ipamorelin for myself, and I'll do 8 weeks on the first time. You can maybe do 12, but then you want to take a break so that when you come back to it, it has the same effect. Again, it's not something that you're going to feel, although some people report they get, like with the growth hormone peptides, they'll get a little bit of bloating or belly, like a belly bloat, and I'll know, okay, it's time to take a break now, and then we can come back to it. But there are some for like brain nootropics, CMAX specifically, where people are really only taking it maybe 2 or 3 days a week. They're taking on days when they have heavy workloads. Those probably don't have to be cycled. So again, the way I work with everybody, everyone's situation is a little bit different. But cycling is a good idea just overall to keep things moving properly. Again, it's not that they're dangerous. It's that we want to make sure they're working like they need to be worked in a very targeted approach.
That's beautiful. We could talk all day about this, but I know you're a very busy lady and you got a lot of stuff and a lot of clients to help as well. What's the one message you would like to share with everybody with your experience about peptides that you would like them to leave this conversation with?
People can be confident that the safety profile is very high. They should do their research, but I think they'll have a hard time finding a lot of negative problems and issues with peptides. And I want them to take away that if we set our foundation, if we can do some exercise and we can stick to whole foods as much as possible and reduce the processed food, that's half the battle right there. The peptides are going to take you to that next level, like I was saying, the top of the pyramid. Actually, Dr. William Seeds was the one who I first heard say that. He literally showed the pyramid, right? We've got the sleep, we've got the exercise, we've got the nutrition. This is the next level. And ultimately, I want everybody to get their foundation set first. And all my clients in Mexico, that's primarily what we're talking about. Let's set the foundation and then stack the peptides on top of that. So I think that everyone's ready in their own time, but I think safety overall, I think they're extremely safe and effective.
My last question for you, 50 years from now, what impact would you like Lisa Levy to? Is it Levy or Levy?
Levy.
I think I got it right. Did I get it right?
Yep. Thank you for asking.
Yeah, I just suddenly
It's
thought
okay.
this right.
It's
Okay.
my whole life of that. So
No, but it's important that people listening also know that not just I'm saying it right, but if they reach out to you to get it right. So what is it that you would like people to have left from you about your mission? What is the life that you lived? What are you leaving with people for generations to come?
that makes me cry. Actually, that's very beautiful. I I want to be an example. That's really what it is. And again, I go back to my clients in Mexico because I don't charge for my time there. I I want everyone to have access and understanding that they can feel like I feel, a lot of them. And the reward that I get from people sending me pictures of themselves, literally pictures of their body, or hey, I'm at the gym and their anxiety is diminished and they have a new lease on life because they feel good and they're healthy and they look good. That's what more can I ask? Right? That's all I care about is that if I have some knowledge that is going to help somebody feel better, look better, have a longer health span, and accomplish what they want, getting on the floor with their grandkids and playing, that's it.
That's beautiful. I'd like to leave you with this. I have a saying, the greatest leaders are not the ones with the most followers. The greatest leaders are the ones that create the most leaders. And what I see you doing is helping one person, but their experience, the same as your experience passed down, now passes down to others. And so you do make generational impact, not just one person. Because as you said, you want to be the example and live the way we can. Lisa, thank you so much for joining me here.
You a
And
pleasure.
I hope that I can get you back on here again sometime and into an even more specific, deeper dive. But thanks for the work you're doing and wishing you the very best. Anybody that wants to contact Lisa, we will put out all the links so you can reach out and maybe you'll be lucky enough to go work with Lisa as well. Thanks so much.